Artificial intelligence helping employers find the talent best suited for the job. But how concerned should we be that this AI eventually will just give the job to itself? Well, earlier I spoke with Siegel, co-founder and CEO of ZipRecruiter, about how AI is changing the recruitment industry and the future of work.
Well, when you look at the recruiting industry online, really the first generation of it was just taking traditional newspaper classifieds and moving it to the web, and then basically relying on serendipity to bring the right job seeker to the right job ads. But now we live in a world where at ZipRecruiter, we have all the jobs and we have all the active job seekers, so why would we leave it to random chance? And we've been able to deploy AI algorithms to do the matching. The thumbs up rate, or the metric we use to measure satisfaction from employers who receive these candidates, is more than double when you just leave it to random chance.
All right, so the algorithm puts someone worthy in the chair in front of the employer, but I imagine there's still that human skill of reading a person in those 15 to 20 minutes to find out if they're going to be right for the job.
The algorithm is very good at identifying who has the right skills on paper to do a job. It will never replace a human talking to another human to measure all the soft skills that go along with those hard skills that determine whether or not somebody gets hired.
Okay, so that's very interesting. One thing I know in the past that had been an issue before technology started matching potential workers with employers would be a bias on the behalf of the employer, perhaps one they didn't even recognize. Is AI going a great distance there into getting rid of those biases?
Well, unconscious bias is pervasive and it's incredibly powerful. Google actually published data on its own business that showed if you had an African American or a Latino last name, you had an 18% lower probability of getting brought in for an interview at Google. And when they went to their African American and Latino employees, it turned out they had the exact same bias. That's how strong unconscious bias is. One of the fears about using AI to do the matching is, since it's being trained on data that was provided by humans, that we could in effect be perfecting bias. However, we get to make choices when we put these algorithms together. So for example, we can do things like exclude name. Name tells you a lot about a person. It can tell you their gender, it can tell you their ethnicity, and in some cases it can even tell you their religion. We can do things like normalize terms like waiter or waitress, actor or actress, to try and remove the gender specificity, so that hopefully what we're providing is the cleanest read of actual skills to put the best candidates in front of employers.
All right, so I would be grateful to artificial intelligence if they picked me out of the crowd, put me in front of a prospective employer, and then I got the job. What I worry about, though, longer term, is that AI just takes my job altogether. I know you've done some research on that. How well-founded are those fears?
Well, AI is a really interesting technology because, unlike previous technology disruptions, AI is the first software application that is capable of not just doing things better than a human, but doing complex things, things that we would traditionally think of as white-collar work, things like medicine. What I would tell you is that so far, all of the successful deployments of AI have been in partnership with a human rather than replacing a human. At ZipRecruiter, we actually just did a study on the future of work. We looked at over 50 million job listings that were posted over the last 6 months, and we measured whether or not AI is currently destroying jobs or creating them, and so far, AI is creating more jobs than it destroys. We even did deep dives into 5 specific sectors, things like education, agriculture, technology, transportation. And even in those sectors, we found that so far AI is creating more jobs than it destroys.
I took a look at some of those findings, and the one that puzzled me a little bit, and you mentioned it there, agriculture. A city set to become the country's next breadbasket through AI. Walk me through that, because if, say, Chipotle needs 40,000 tomatoes, I probably can't grow them for them in the city.
Actually, interestingly, you can. So there's a whole new area of agriculture that is exploding in the US right now, and I suspect will soon make its way around the world, called precision farming. This is where they essentially take a large warehouse space, they stack it with growing devices, and then they grow crops indoors, and they are able to grow year-round. Unlike traditional farms, which basically get about a 60% harvest out of every crop they lay down, these warehouses are able to harvest 98% of the crops they produce. They're able to do it locally, they're able to do it organically, and that's going to reduce the price of locally grown organic produce, and it's going to make it available much more of the year than you are used to having it today.
Very interesting. All right, so maybe you made me a bit of a believer on that one. You mentioned earlier about the fact that as AI destroys jobs, it's creating more jobs than it's destroying. Obviously, they would be different kinds of jobs. So what's the responsibility here of the corporate world to make sure that as people are displaced, they have the skills to take on the new roles?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of sort of hand-waving about this notion of jobageddon and how AI is going to come decimate the job market. And the reality is it's highly unlikely to play out that way. And when we talk about retraining, which is the big idea on the table right now, it sounds daunting. People think they're going to have to relearn how to do a job they already do, or everybody thinks they're going to have to become a data scientist and learn to write code. That's not what retraining is. Whether you realize it or not, you're constantly undergoing retraining in your everyday life. How many of us are old enough to remember when we used maps? I'm not talking about a navigation app. I'm talking about an actual map. So you had no problem learning the software that was put in an address and let it plot a route for you. This is exactly the same kind of retraining that's going to go on across a multitude of different industries. Yes, everybody's going to have to get comfortable with new software. That does not mean that they're going to have to go back to school and get a new degree.
Siegel is the co-founder and CEO of ZipRecruiter.